Today's project is a challenge for me. I'm curious what a Lego phone might look like and whether I could build one that would function like a normal smartphone. There's still quite a few Lego blocks left over from my son's younger days, so some of these should be useful. It's time to see if I can do this. I was never really good at building with Lego bricks, like how I've seen other people do, but this is a project I'm motivated to complete. I've collected some of the pieces I felt might be useful, and I'll figure out the rest of what I need as I go. Regarding the phone I chose to use, it's a Samsung Galaxy A10e. For this project though, the phone should make no difference. I used one of my project phones that I usually pick up from Black Friday specials. It's a decent quality phone, can be used as a daily driver, and cost only $50. The first thing I need to do is dismantle the phone so I can figure out what sections of the phone I'll use in the construction of my Lego phone. In general, I'm expecting there to be a mid-chassis, which is what I'll work around to create the new Lego shell of the phone. Also, the screen will be remounted to the perimeter of the new Lego shell. I'm also hoping all of the buttons, ports, and cameras line up with some of the holes already existing in the Lego bricks, but if not, I guess I'll be cutting or drilling some new holes. This is the mostly disassembled A10e. Now that I have the major parts separated, I can begin fitting them into the Lego shell. I did damage the screen during disassembly, but that shouldn't hold up the Lego construction. If the Lego phone comes together as planned, I can order a replacement screen at that time. I'm starting out with a Lego base plate to make it easier to design different sized shells that the smartphone parts will sit in. I don't think I can create a typical frame with a screen and rear cover simply due to the thickness of Lego pieces. A simple shell is probably the best way to go. Right now, I have the mid-chassis fitted within the confines of this Lego block configuration using Lego Mindstorm blocks. It's a snug fit, but it still slides easily. At this point, the mid-chassis of the phone is not the stock one I started with. I've actually trimmed 1/8 inch off of both long edges to get it to fit. You can see the power and volume rocker buttons are right at the edge of the chassis, whereas normally they are recessed about 1/16 inch. Because I don't feel these Mindstorm blocks are the ideal ones to use, I'd like to get the mid-chassis to fit within blocks that have the holes on the side rather than the top. The problem I then encountered is that when I attach those blocks, the mid-chassis fit is extremely tight. A lot tighter than I'd want it to be. On top of that, for consistency, I'd still have to put that same block on the other edge also. I'll attempt to shave off more plastic where I can to get the mid-chassis just a little narrower. What I did was go at it with a razor, trying to take off thin strips of plastic at a time, but doing that was easier said than done. In the end though, it turned out okay with minimal sanding to finish up. With the edges now trimmed a little more, the fit within the blocks is exactly the way I want it. A good amount of space between the phone and blocks, which can allow for modifications later like different sized blocks or even the buttons that will have to control the power and volume rocker. Now that I have the sides trimmed to how I want them, I want to also trim the top and bottom edges as much as possible. The motherboard and connected daughter board are a lot closer to those edges, but I don't think they'll create a problem. There is a portion of the motherboard that protrudes right to the top edge of the chassis, but I'm going to grind it down and hope that it doesn't ruin the circuitry. Here's the completed trimming done to the mid-chassis to get it to fit within the sides of the potential Lego phone. If I can keep the phone's perimeter to this size, I'd be happy with those results. I'll cut out what I have so far for what will be the front face and sides of the phone. I won't get this on camera, but I will eventually use two-sided tape to keep the side pieces adhered to the blue backboard. I think the pieces will still be able to come apart, but at least they won't easily get knocked off from usage. For myself, the most complicated part of this build will be trying to provide access through the Lego blocks to the USB-C port and the headphone jack. I'll also have to design some kind of Lego button that will work through the Lego block to power the phone on and off, and also to depress both sides of the volume rocker. The mid-chassis sits a little low for the ports and buttons to line up with the holes in the Lego block, so what I'm going to do is glue this sheet of Kydex onto the blue base plate. This will raise the height of the mid-chassis relative to the holes in the Lego side pieces, so it'll be easier to access and modify the buttons and ports. These are my parts for the buttons. Right now, they don't seem like they could make a button based on the size, so that's what I'll be working on next. The reason I use these axles as the push buttons are because they have this flange on them. I felt the flange would work well for pushing the smartphone's button that would sit just below it. With the Lego axles and the brick holes, you can see how it sort of lines up with the silver push buttons on the smartphone's flex cable. Mounting the axles properly was simple enough. I removed the Lego brick so I could easily access the holes, slid the axles into the brick from the inside facing side, remounted the brick in the same location, then slid on the axle spacers, which are only there for cosmetic purposes. After trimming the excess axle off with a utility knife, this is what the completed push buttons look like. On the A10E, the single button by itself is for power. The two buttons together are volume up and down. To test the function of the buttons when pressing them, there should be a clicking sound. I can hear the clicking sound as I push each button, so using these axles did work as I'd hoped they would. For accessing the ports, I thought I would use the holes in the Lego block as a guide to help me create cutouts in the block to access the ports. Then I realized I should instead use smaller blocks on each side and leave a gap where the ports are. This idea would save me the time and effort of manually creating the cutout. Although the daughter board with the ports on it is not held in place yet, I can hold it in place by hand while I test to see if the USB-C and headphone jack will plug in correctly. Because the port is not right at the edge of the smartphone's outer shell, this test helps confirm that the cable housing will fit into the Lego block to access the port. To mount the screen, I plan to glue or tape it to the blue baseboard I had started out with. There's a couple of immediate challenges I have to deal with while I mount the screen. The first is the flex cable that connects the screen to the motherboard. The cable is made just long enough to reach the connector in its original configuration. Now that the screen sits further away due to the thickness of the Lego, I'll have to see if I can get the cable to reach the port, but that'll take some modifications to how the cable is run. The second big challenge, which I probably won't be able to fix, is both cameras. In its original configuration, the A10E cameras sit right up against the shell, so there's nothing to obstruct the camera. Now that the Lego shell sits at least 1/8 of an inch away from the front and rear camera, the edges will show up in any photos. I'll have to see what I can do to get at least one of the cameras to work. I'll be working on the screen first. Here's the original cable run from the back of the screen through a slot in the mid-chassis, over the battery compartment, and up to a connector that sits on the bottom of the motherboard. The first thing I'll do is mark on the Lego shell where the original mid-chassis slot lines up with my Lego shell, because this is where the modifications must start from. More than likely, to make the modifications as flexible as possible, I'm probably going to make any existing and new slots larger to allow the cable to enter the mid-chassis from a more random section without that section being in the way. I don't have a precision tool to cut a slot in my Lego shell, so I'm going to drill a series of holes until they're close enough together for me to use the drill bit to cut between the drilled holes. This isn't the best way to do this, but this is the only cutting tool I have for something like this. Once I smooth it out, I think it should be a clean enough slot to start out with. There will probably be more cutting to do anyway. I now have an initial slot cut in the Lego shell. I can mount the mid-chassis to verify the alignment between both pieces are reasonably close. I can then test run the cable through the Lego shell, then the mid-chassis, to see how much the connector end has been pulled away from the motherboard connection. It doesn't look like the flex cable connector is too far off. I'd say about 1/8 inch short, which means there's not much compensating needed to get the cable connector realigned with the motherboard connection. To make up for the 1/8 inch that the flex cable is short by, there are some things I can try, which won't hurt if I do all of them. The first is to cut away part of the battery compartment wall so the cable won't have to run up through the slot and over the hump of the wall. There's also the motherboard side of the battery compartment where I can shorten that wall the same way. The last thing I can do is make the slot through the Lego shell and mid-chassis larger. With all of these modifications, I should be able to get the additional 1/8 inch so the flex cable can reach the motherboard connector. I've made all the modifications to connect the screen. As you can see here, I've expanded the slot in the Lego shell to a large hole and copied the hole onto the mid-chassis. Before I mount the screen, I'm going to glue the mid-chassis into the Lego shell in its permanent location. The mid-chassis location is important for the function of the buttons. I've added a couple of cardboard wedges to force the mid-chassis to the desired side and will let the glue dry for a day to be sure nothing moves out of place. With the glue having dried for a full day, I can start putting my Lego phone together. I'll start with both boards. During the rebuild, I had put a lot of weight and pressure on the mid-chassis when gluing it to the Lego shell, so I had some doubts whether the motherboard would still fit into the mid-chassis, but it seems to snap in place okay. I can also do some of the cables. For sure these skinny wires are out of the way, so I'll mount those. The flex cable between the motherboard and daughterboard will block the battery, so I can only install one of the two connectors for now. The only other one left is the screen, so I'll do that next. For mounting the screen, I'll first connect it to the motherboard. I'm running the cable under the battery rather than over, because that helps make up for the cable being short with the new Lego shell. Surprisingly, the screen is not as off-center as I thought it would be. At this point, enough of the parts are in place to perform a power-on test to see if it will do so without issue. I'll connect the battery connector to the motherboard and begin the testing. One other thing, I still did not get a new screen, but this one I damaged during disassembly should be enough as long as it can light up, even if the picture is unrecognizable. When I initially tested the screen when I first cracked it, the picture was a lot better than what I'm seeing now. I didn't think I damaged it anymore, but I guess maybe the cracks extended themselves even from just picking it up. Anyway, the screen is lighting up, so that's good. My Lego phone is working, and all I need now is a new screen. I did try a single flat sheet of Lego to cover the entire back of the phone, but I didn't like it when it came to removing it. Legos can be pretty stubborn when they're being removed, so instead I went with the smaller scattered blocks around the edge. They still have enough hold to not fall off, but can be removed easily. So this is my completed Lego smartphone. A proof of concept idea I was curious to see what it could look like. The nice thing about a Lego smartphone, if Lego did make one, is that it wouldn't have to be the fastest performer. It wouldn't have to take the best photos. All it would have to be is offered by Lego in some building kit or pre-made, and I feel that would be enough to start something interesting. I hope this video has brought back good memories of your time with Lego building blocks. Leave your questions and comments in the comment section below. That's all I have for now, and I'll catch you in the next video.